Punishing tariffs from Canada's closest ally are driving the Carney government to look for relief from some former adversaries. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand visited both China and India last week in efforts to mend rocky relationships and work towards stronger trade ties. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand joins me now. Minister, good to see you again. Thank you for your time.
Great to see you, David.
I know there's a new foreign policy under Prime Minister Carney than under the previous Prime Minister, and more focused on the real politics, the need to have a relationship with the two largest countries on earth. But there is some concern that big diplomatic issues are getting kind of pushed aside with that. I mean, what do you respond to people who are worried about just the nature of China and the relationship with India as well?
Well, if I could just address the first part of your question about our foreign policy, it's pragmatic, it's intentional, and it is based on ensuring that our diplomatic efforts abroad serve the domestic population here in our country. And so when we think about India and China and other relationships, we have to remember that it is necessary to raise issues of concern to the Canadian population. At the same time, we need to be pragmatic about our economic needs.
Right.
The relationships are complex. They shouldn't be grouped together. But make no mistake, we will not leave Canadian interests, such as public safety, such as foreign interference, unaddressed. We will make sure we have a process and a path to address those issues. At the same time, we will ensure that we are servicing the interests of the Canadian population writ large, especially in this time of economic stress.
Well, look, obviously we're not very different countries, very different issues. But let's start with China. One of the live pressing issues right now, obviously, the tariffs on canola, the tariffs on seafood, a retaliation to the EV tariffs that Canada brought in to have alignment with the United States. Was there any progress made in your conversations in China on resolving these particular issues?
So let's be clear that our trade with China at a bilateral basis is about $118 billion. They're our second largest trading partner. In terms of the specific sectors that you mentioned, I raised those sectors during our bilateral conversation, but the gist of the interaction and my effort there was to put on the table a strategic partnership framework so that whenever Canada has concerns, especially at a trade level, that it wishes to raise with China, we do so not on an issue-by-issue basis, but we do this in the context of a framework for the pragmatic, the constructive, the professional conversation that we need to have with our second largest trading partner.
But you have, Premier Scott Moe, Premier Wab Kinew, they want the EV tariffs dropped to take pressure off canola. I was just home in Newfoundland for the election in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the fishing sector there is losing market share in China. So, I mean, can these issues get resolved without dropping the EV tariffs? Are you prepared to do that if that's what it takes? Because that causes problems with the U.S.
Right. So I can't speak for the government on the other side. I can speak for our government in terms of our foreign policy. We are advocating for the removal of sectoral tariffs across the board. But what we need to do when there is a country that is raising these issues of an economic nature that affect these sectors, we need to have that strategic dialogue. And the partnership that we will continue to work on is one where these issues can be raised across the board. In fact, let's look at some of the other issues. There are economic issues as well as global governance and climate change issues that we want to work on from a multilateral perspective. There are also issues relating to crime, cyber scams, etc. Also a concern that we raised in the meeting for us to work on together. And then people-to-people ties, ensuring there's greater air traffic flow, making sure that visa processing is constructive and working. So again, we need a framework for the conversation with China, the strategic partnership that we agreed to is going to provide that framework and essentially a roadmap forward.
But aren't we as a country just kind of stuck between the strategic interests of the two great powers? You know, China and the United States, so much of the trade disruptions happening is them trying to counter each other, a non-market economy against the biggest economy on earth. And, you know, getting alignment with Trump on EVs has put canola and seafood, under some serious pressure here.
Well, let's be clear. The two-way trade between China and Canada is at about $118 billion. That's two-way trade. In other words, we have goods that China needs, just as the opposite may be true. There is going to be recalibration in the relationship now, and the framework that I put on the table during my meeting with my counterpart, Minister Wang Yi, is the first step towards ensuring that we're not dealing with the relationship on an issue-by-issue basis. We have a productive, recalibrated, intentional relationship with a very formidable economic partner in the Indo-Pacific.
So the Prime Minister is expected to meet with President Xi later this month, I believe, if I got my dates correct. I mean, should we expect development on the trade dispute, on this strategic framework that you've talked about? Should we expect something concrete coming out of that when the two leaders get together?
Well, can I just emphasize that the strategic partnership that we both agreed to is concrete. The meeting,
understanding the processes, but in terms of changes on these issues that we've been talking about.
The prospective meeting between the leaders is one that is still being discussed between their respective offices. And I will say that much of the work that my counterpart and I were doing was laying the foundation for the broader relationship, not only a potential meeting between the leaders, but we want to make progress. I want to make progress. And the way you do that, when you need to diversify supply chains, when you need to grow your economy, when you need to offer alternatives from an economic perspective, is to have the conversation like I had and put on the table for agreement the strategic partnership, which we both walked away from, ensuring that we'll work together. Again, I invited him here for a conversation to follow up, and we are working out the next steps.
Okay, just to switch to India if I can, because Canada and India have normalized relations after some difficult times. I wonder if you got any assurances on the transnational repression issue, because I know we talked a lot about the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and former Prime Minister Trudeau saying there was credible allegations linking agents of the government of India to that. But it seems to persist, right? We've heard from a Sikh activist, Inderjit Singh Gosal, who said that in August and September, he was warned by the RCMP that he could be killed within the next number of weeks, and urged him to essentially move into a new identity and move into witness protection. So it doesn't seem to have stopped. So, I mean, what do you say to the concerns that normalizing with India? I understand the economic imperative and the size of that economy and the people-to-people ties, but this continues to happen here in Canada.
There is no place at all for a violation of the Canadian Criminal Code, threats to public safety, undermining the rule of law in the country that we know and love called Canada. So at every stage, I have raised the concerns that we have as a government and the Canadian population relating to public safety. And in fact, there is an ongoing law enforcement dialogue between the two governments at the most senior levels. My deputy minister and the head of the NSIA were in India just a few weeks ago, for example. In addition, we have listed the Bishnoi Group as a terrorist entity in Canadian law, responding to the concerns relating to public safety that have been raised. And then finally, I know as a matter of fact, as do you, that the RCMP investigation is ongoing and is absolutely imperative to ensuring that the rule of law remains firm and unimpeded by any other policy of our government.
But what you outlined there are things that Canada has done and Canada is doing. I mean, what has India done in the interim? Because if we still have the RCMP knocking on the doors of Sikh activists and saying your life is in imminent danger, you need to leave the life you've built and go into hiding, then India clearly hasn't stopped this, right? Because the Bishnoi gang is believed to be the arm of the agents of the Indian government in this country, and we can list them as a terrorist organization here in Canada all we want, but if the Indian actors are still giving them instructions and a target list, something is not working on that end of the relationship.
Well, to be clear, when there is an entity listed as a terrorist group under Canadian law, the full force and effect of the Canadian Criminal Code will apply to activities of that group. So it shouldn't be brushed over.
I'm not brushing it over, but if India and its
public
diplomats have been the ones giving the list and the orders, that's still the problem.
Exactly.
Right?
And I don't deny the importance of ensuring that that law enforcement dialogue, where we are raising at every turn concerns relating to public safety and security in our own country, continues. That is an absolute priority. The protection of public safety in this country, regardless of who you are, must continue. It is the foremost priority in this conversation, and at the same time, ensuring that we are fulfilling other needs from an economic perspective.
But you've heard the criticism, I'm sure, from the World Sick Organization and others saying Canada's kind of trying to pretend as if everything has gone back to normal. And you know, this reporting about...
That's untrue. We're not going back to normal. Back to normal wouldn't involve a law enforcement dialogue. Back to normal would not include listing the Bishnoi gang. Back to normal would not include an independent RCMP investigation. Back to normal would not include the continued raising at every turn of the public safety concerns of the Canadian public. So back to normal is not happening now. We are at all times ensuring that public safety concerns are at the very top of the agenda. If you take a look at the joint statement between the two countries, the first page is in fact dedicated to the concerns relating to law enforcement.
So just as a final point, and just for the record, back to normal was what the World Sick Organization said, not my opinion on this. You've talked about a dialogue and process. What tangible progress are you seeing? And how would Canadians know that India is changing the way it conducts itself, you know, in the affairs of this country or in its external affairs? Because if people keep getting warnings from the RCMP, at some point, what do you do?
I understand the point that you're making, and I will say that there is a productive conversation that is occurring between officials of our government and the government of India. They have not before issued a joint statement like we issued on Monday together. If you take a look at the wording of that joint statement, it is forceful. If you take a listen to the words of Minister Jaishankar, the foreign minister, my counterpart, those words are also reiterative of the position that law enforcement matters. So for the first time, we are having a very constructive, policy-oriented dialogue with India to ensure that public safety remains at the very top of the agenda.
Minister, I've gone over time. I want to thank you for your time. This Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand. Thank you.
Thank you so much.